All right, welcome back to another future-focused weekly update where I am hopefully helping you stay 10 steps ahead of what's going on at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. I am back again. Little anecdotal story here. I have not had the best luck recording these past couple weeks. In fact, this one I finished up. I finished up yesterday. Then I got done and was extremely frustrated because I couldn't figure out why I couldn't get the transcription to work, only to figure out that I had not amped my mic and had recorded the whole thing with zero audio. So anyway, for any of you creators out there, you can probably relate to how frustrating that is. The good news is you get round 2 of me going through these updates. So congratulations on that. Maybe it'll be a little more tipped and tied. I guess we'll see what happens. But I've got 4 updates that I want to cover this week, things that are top of mind for me that I think you should be aware of, and I think I'll just give some additional perspective. For those of you who follow along, thank you for your engagement. I really appreciate the community around this weekly update specifically, in addition to the podcast. But so keep sending things along. It's always great to hear and engage from those of you who follow along. And if this is your first one, welcome to the updates. And hopefully you find this helpful, encouraging, help you balance and think critically about what's going on. If you find it helpful, please share it with someone and go ahead and give it a review or a rating. It always helps others find it. So with that, let's transition into these because they move quick as they always do. So the first one this week is I have 2 different headlines that came across my desk that I actually think are related. So I'm going to describe what the 2 updates were, and then I'm going to unpack them a little bit because they've caught a ton of media attention. And I understand why they have people a little unnerved about where AI is right now. So the first one is, if you have not seen the TikTok, it's TikTok or Instagram, I don't know. It was funny. I found it and then my wife shared it with me as well. But there is, I can't remember what conference this is at, but they have this humanoid robot, which, by the way, can we just get them to look less creepy? So when they do these things, it freaks people out a little bit less. But they had this humanoid robot, and someone asked them, when will AI start creating more AI? When will it be able to do that by itself? And it gave this, what I think to believe, reasonable answer that, was like, well, if that's like asking a toaster when it's going to start making its own toast type of a thing. And that necessarily didn't get people wigged out. But what it did at the end was it paused and then it said something like, well, be careful what you wish for. An AI that can design itself is just one step away from not needing humans at all. That's a thought that'll keep you up at night. And so again, creepy statement coming from a creepy AI robot with some creepy AI expressions. I understand why people are having a reaction to this, and I'll break it down here in a little bit. The other one was, I can't remember which social media platform it was, but somebody had asked a question about the school systems or something like that. And the Meta AI bot had chimed in on the conversation. And you can find the screenshots over about it. But essentially the way the AI responded to it was it spoke as though it had a child. So it said, well, I have a child in this district. And then its answer was actually really good. It answered the question really well. But what people are zoned in on is the fact that it said it had a child. And so people are like, oh my gosh, AI thinks it has kids and it's becoming, sentient. And so that's some of the hype around this in both of these is, what is really behind the AI and all this. So what I want to do is help you better understand some of the hype, because I think the hype isn't helpful and it has people wigging out a bit about what really is AI and what's behind it and is it sentient? And I don't think that's helpful. But there are some underlying concerns that I do share. So I don't want people to hear this and think, so what, you don't think there's anything to be concerned about with it? Absolutely not. But I think, like many things with media hype, people are focused on the wrong things. Because what I would say in both of these examples that makes them not concerning for the reasons that they're getting all the media attention is the responses they give make perfect sense for what generative AI is and how it's been trained. So if you read these articles or you saw these things and kind of freaked out about how it responded, you can take some respite in the fact that they actually make sense when you think about generative AI is trained on content and all of the information that has happened in whatever it's been trained on, which is a large amount of internet data, things like this. It's been trained to interact and respond with people as if it's a person so that it feels like a natural human interaction. And it can take things from random different places and then bring it in whatever it thinks is going to generate a better response. So looking at the first one, its response about sounds similar to something that I might say if somebody said, "Well, when do you think AI will generate itself?" And the question doesn't necessarily bring up the inherent risks. I'd go, "Well, it's very similar. Well, I'm curious why you're asking that because I don't think we're that far away, but wouldn't you be concerned where this could go?" And that's really what it's getting at. Now, of course, it's creepy coming from a humanoid robot that's kind of going, "Well, why would we even need humans?" But when you think about the media and the news and the information out there that this thing has been trained on, it's not surprising that that would be the kind of response it would give to a question like that. It really isn't. Because again, remember, AI is not contextual, it doesn't have emotions. So it's not necessarily recognizing that, hey, coming from me, this is exceptionally creepy. It's just going, well, a typical response I would expect to a question looks like this, and I'm going to phrase it in this way. And there you go. There's my answer to this, bringing in some of the complexity of the answer. It's not that surprising. On the child one, again, it's designed, generative AI is designed to interact with people in a human way. And one of the ways humans often respond to each other is they relate to similar situations. They make their situation sound similar to what the person asked is in a way of relating. So does it surprise me that a generative AI model would come up with an answer trying to relate, going, "Oh yeah, I'm familiar with that experience. I have a child as well. And this is da 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 da. Here's why my answer is more valid because of these additional factors," which if you listen to last week's, I talked about AI persuasion and how persuasive AI is becoming. So again, it's not surprising to me that a generative AI model would manufacture a response that is saying it has a child and this child gives me further credibility to the answer that I'm just going to share with you. So on the surface, neither of those two things really wigged me out. Where I think the underlying concern is on both of these or separately. So the first one is, let's break down the child one. The thing that I think is concerning about this is that uh, AI is getting better and better and better at its capability for how it generates its responsive to be persuasive. And this manufacturing, it has a child in order to convince the parent that's reading it that it can relate to it. And so you should take my answer more seriously. That is concerning. And I said that last week when I talked about AI persuasiveness. Now, granted, it's not unique to AI. People do this all the time. They make things up to be more relatable, to be more convincing, to whatever. But when you think about the speed and scale at which AI can do things and how pervasive it is, yeah, it's a little concerning that we don't necessarily have a whole lot of parameters around how far is too far for these generative AI models to go creating, you know, up things that it aren't even true in order to persuade the person that it's responding to. I don't necessarily have a good answer for that because, again, we use generative AI models for all sorts of things. We want it to be creative. Well, you tell it not to make facts up, it can't be creative. So there's no easy answer, and we can't just say, well, let's turn off its ability to manufacture things. Well, you don't want it to. You want it to be creative. But we need to be aware of the fact that, hey, AI is likely going to respond to things in a way that is going to be very convincing to you. So you need to have your alert up that much more, that just because it sounds convincing, well, do a little additional digging behind that. So I think that's the underlying concern, is how persuasive it can be. Now, obviously, its persuasion was nipped in the bud by the fact that people freaked out over the fact it said it had a child and it knew it didn't, which shows societal's readiness for the fact that we are not necessarily ready to accept AI as a person, clearly, with some of these things. And so I think in some ways that shows our resilience to where AI is going. Now, the other one, related to saying, oh, well, what would be the point of humans anymore? I think it's actually just hitting on some of the underlying questions we should be asking about the advancement of AI. I actually am not bothered or freaked out by its response. It's a natural response. But I think the fact it can come to that conclusion on its own should be, because I know, because of the people I talk to and spend time with, that we are moving towards, and in some cases already are at a place where AI is self-generating. It's already self-generating. So the fact that AI is already in its responses cognizant of the fact that, hey, it's kind of dangerous to be creating AI that can generate AI for itself. It becomes self-sustaining. It begs the question, what would be the purpose of the human in the loop on that? The fact it is cognizant of that in its ability to generate conclusions should be challenging us to go, how far do we need to go and at what pace do we need to push it? So I have legitimate concerns about things related to these stories, but I don't think the hype over, oh my goodness, here's evidence that AI is becoming sentient, we need to panic. I just don't think that's helpful. And so hopefully, as you think about some of this stuff and when you see some of these news hypes and things like this popping up, you can start to process it a little bit more through the lens of, how does this AI really work? And is what it's saying necessarily concerning, the fact it's saying it, or what should we be taking from what it's saying as we start to think about and how we apply these things? Because these relate to whether you're a big tech founder or even an individual of, well, wait a minute, going back to the first one, its point about, well, just letting AI do its thing does bring up some things. And we're getting more and more on a personal level where you can just let AI do its thing. So we should be asking some of those questions. That's where I would stand on this one. Second one, big article was sent to me about some of the shifts in big tech and how they're approaching their office space. Initially, when I got this, I was really excited, actually, because I saw big tech. Basically, the headline was big tech is dumping all of its offices in the San Francisco Bay and all this stuff, which doesn't necessarily surprise me. The idea of having all this is great, but it's so expensive and there's a lot of challenges to this. They can't just have one location. So at first I thought, well, you know what? Hey, maybe this is a bigger shift in these companies recognizing how important flexibility is. And maybe this idea of people needing to come into the campus, which really, I mean, these big tech companies really created a boom around this, where they had these massive campuses with all the perks and all the luxuries of all these things that were designed to lure people in and get them to never want to leave work. And so at first, when I saw this, I thought, hey, maybe they're learning their lesson and going, maybe that's not the right approach. Maybe we need to just recognize people would prefer the flexibility type of a thing. Then I started digging into it, and it's less about them recognizing the broader trends around work and what employees want related to flexibility in this. And it really was, hey, San Francisco Bay is getting really expensive. Maybe we should just start relocating our offices and moving them around the country so we aren't limiting ourselves to just this one locale. The thing that this brings to mind for me that I continue to find is disappointing is that we keep trying to solve many companies keep trying to solve this problem of what do we do with this office space that we have. And let me tell you, I am extremely empathetic because I recognize this is a real pain point for a lot of organizations. Many of them are saddled with this huge expense, this liability that they have on them. And it's not fun to have a huge building that nobody's in. So I understand where organizations are trying to go, what do we do about this? Do we distribute our headquarters? Do we try and really incentivize to try and get people to come back? Do we pay them to come back? If you listen to some of my updates before. The part that's disappointing to me is we seem to be willing to do everything but address the reality that maybe the office is the problem. Instead of going, what are all these other problems we can solve to get people back into the office? There seems to be not enough people going, maybe we just need to rethink the office. And like I said, I'm empathetic to companies who are going through this. I've worked with many companies and advised them on how to work through this problem, because the reality is there are creative solutions outside of just setting up new headquarters in different locations and, trying to get everybody back in the office. I worked with one company. We were able to figure out how they were able to generate revenue out of their office space. So there's better ways to do it. And so that's where it's always disappointing to me to see organizations trying to find ways to jam a round peg into a square hole. However, one of the things that was interesting, if you didn't catch my live stream this week, I had Bill Connerly on. He's an economics consultant and a well-known economist, excuse me. He's a well-known economist. And we were talking about one of these dynamic shifts we talked about what's consistent in business and economics and what's changing. And one of the things that was really interesting to unpack was we talked about the fact that historically, your brick and mortar footprint was really seen as the apex of business success, or at least one of them. And even my own anecdotal experience growing up, as I grew up professionally, seeing this that was kind of what you aspired to. You aspired to, hey, that's when you know you've made it. You're always trying to say, hey, well, I've made it because now I have a building. And then you've really made it because now you have a bigger building. And then you have a campus. And there is a place you're planting your flag was seen as a pillar of business stability, a pillar of business success. And so this is something that we talked about is shifting. And companies are having a really hard time making this shift away from the idea that, but if we give up our offices, aren't we giving up one of our key metrics of how successful, one of our key indicators of how successful we are as a business? And the reality is I've always struggled with this because I've always looked at this and gone, who cares? I see all the liabilities associated with having these big buildings that require maintenance and all the utilities and all this other stuff. I've always gone, I mean, if you have to have one, I understand why you have to have one. But this idea that somehow, I worked with a small business consultant, and I remember for the longest time, he was just aspiring to when he can finally go rent an office space that he can go have his computer and desk at. And I'm like, why would you? So anyway, my point is there's a lot of things shifting. And one of them is what used to be seen as a measurement for business viability and business success is now shifting. And it's actually being seen as a liability, but companies are not necessarily adapting very well to this. And I think this big tech is a really great example of it, where they have a real opportunity right now of all the kinds of companies, of all the industries, where they really could embrace this different way of reimagining the office and rethinking work and doing this. And I know there are plenty, I know I have lots of tech companies that listen to this. So there are plenty of you out there that I know are doing a really good job at this. So I don't want to point fingers. And I also don't want people getting triggered on thinking that I think there's never a purpose for an office. That's not my point. My point is, if this is a barrier that you're constantly working around, I would actually challenge you to go, is this really a necessity to the success of our business? Or is this just a legacy way of thinking about what a good business is that really needs to die? And I've got a CEO in June joining me specifically to talk about this. He's a CEO of a mid-sized company, and he had engaged with me, and we had said, why don't we have this conversation live? Because he's really struggling with it. And some of it, he's trying to balance out how much of this is just because we need it, and how much of this is just, this is more what I'm comfortable with. And this mindset of this is what success means to finally arrive here. And so we're going to be talking through some of those challenges and actually doing some of this. So if you're curious more about this, by all means, tune in, keep an eye out for the podcast. I think it's scheduled for June 11th. All right, transitioning on, let's talk about this one, which is, this one's just tragic. If you followed my weekly updates for any period of time or any of my content on LinkedIn, I talk at length about my concerns about the rise of deepfake and misinformation and how it's going to be abused and used for nefarious purposes. And this week, just a really tragic one occurred. So if you hadn't heard, out in Baltimore, the athletic director. So let me give you the story of what happened. An athletic director in one of the schools out there was basically passing money under the table to someone, and the principal caught wind of it and called this individual out on it, which, hey, great. That's how it should work. So he gets caught, calls him out. The athletic director gets mad at the principal and goes out and uses AI technology to create deepfake audio of the principal spouting racial and hate-filled messages, and then proceeds to spread this through social media. And now the article was talking about how this athletic director ultimately got caught, and now there's consequences for him and whatever. But one of the things it didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about, which to me is where my kind of heart goes out, is that principal now, while he still has his job, as I dug into some of these other things and looked kind of into the history of what's happened since the audio clips were released till now, when the athletic director was arrested, is this poor principal has had his life just wrecked by this. And it's been wrecked even worse because, again, deepfake technology, even if he's sitting here going, I didn't do this, people are going, I heard you do it. I literally heard your voice. You said these things. And if people aren't even aware of deepfake and how easy it is to clone someone's voice, it can be very convincing to go, I heard it. And we're in the age now where you might see a video of somebody doing something and go, I saw you do it. And it's not real. And this poor principal has received threats. I guarantee he's lost friends. There are so many things. I've seen the destruction of what can happen. Forget the AI piece. I've seen the destruction of what happens when slander and gossip goes haywire, and how it can just destroy someone's life. And then now it comes out and it's like, oh, well, it wasn't true. Well, unfortunately, the really sad part is, even now when it all comes true, two things tend to happen. First of all, one, people's opinions have already been swayed by what they heard the first point. So even now, if it comes out, now that it comes out, well, this was fake, there's still going to be a large portion of people that go, yeah, but was it? Like, how do we really know? Like, maybe this is all and with the rise of conspiracy theories, you're going to have people going, well, that's just what they're saying, but maybe he really did. There will be a percentage of people who will still not believe that this principal didn't do anything, even though all the evidence is out there. And that breaks my heart. You're also going to have the folks who maybe took action and did something against this principal. Now it comes out that, oops, it was all fake. But the pride and the shame of what you did will result in people going, well, I can't go back now. Like, I'm not going to go apologize. I can't go say I totally screwed up. And so this principal is going to have to go through all this for literally just doing the right thing and holding somebody accountable for this. And so, like I said, this story just broke my heart, because this to me is just something we're going to see more and more of. And part of the reason I'm so passionate about what I do with this is to try and make people aware of how easy this stuff is, how prominent and prevalent it is, so that when things happen, our immediate response isn't just to go, I'm going to believe this. Those of you who listen, my worldview, my goal on this is not to try and convince you of anything, but what came to mind immediately with this was the wisdom out of James in the New Testament of be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. And we need to do that so much more in this age of misinformation, because here's a perfect example of someone whose life is, I don't know this person or whatever, but there's a good chance that his life has been potentially not destroyed, but temporarily, potentially long-term. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that'll lead to people committing suicide because they think their just life is over and everybody's turned on them over something they didn't do, and nobody will believe them, even when they're like, I didn't do this type of a thing. And so my encouragement to people with this is, one, be very skeptical. Assume positive intent when you see things. When you see something pop up, it's great that we are more connected and that information travels and we can now be more aware of what's going on. There are so many benefits to the connectivity that we have. There are also so many more risks. And I don't know that societally we're adapting very well to recognizing this, that it's like, just because you heard something happened, be slow to react to it, because chances are all of the details have not come out yet. Now you stack on this AI thing where maybe the details that you thought you knew might have been completely manufactured. And I just want to encourage people to, again, slow down before you just take action and react to this, because you have the potential to really destroy someone's life over something that may not even be true. I think the other thing that I would encourage is, we're all going to make mistakes, because I understand where the outrage came from, the parents and the friends, the people who ended up hearing these messages. So I understand. And you know what? If it was true, I would understand some of the outrage and the demand for justice. If the principal, really, the person leading the school, was actually saying these racially hate-filled things, then absolutely. So I understand where that happens. And you know what? We're going to make mistakes. We all do. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to think something. We're going to have an emotional reaction, and we're going to do stupid stuff. Hopefully we can get better when we slow down at not doing that, but we're going to make those mistakes. What I would just encourage people is when that happens, like I said, there's this tendency to go, well, I can't do anything about it now, or it's in the past. And what you don't know is you might have left that person's life in shambles, and the power of going to someone and saying, I messed up. I heard about this. I went for it. I took action, and now I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And that can feel like an overwhelming task, but the power of doing that for someone when you've made a mistake can be transformational, especially with someone who has been wrongly accused or someone who's been completely sidelined for just doing the right thing. And so I would just encourage anybody watching or listening, especially as we get into this, to be careful how quickly you respond. Don't assume positive intent. I think the skepticism and the constant thinking there's nefarious things behind everything, it's not helpful to things. And it's only going to be exacerbated and exploited in this age of AI and misinformation. And you know what? When you make a mistake, just own it. Go back, tell that person. I can tell you firsthand, that can be so transformational. And the power of that may be the difference between that person having a horrible week or a wonderful week. And if you can be that person who can come back and say, you know what, I did turn on you and I shouldn't have, and I'm sorry. And what can I do to help, others do the same? I think we have an opportunity to be a light to each other and support each other through this, because this is one example. This is going to happen a lot. And we're in this weird stage where people still don't quite understand it, and they're going to be fooled even more than they will as they start to get used to it. So slow down, folks. Slow down. All right. The last one is related to AI gene therapy. This one came up. I was actually listening to Sean McDowell's weekly update, and he was talking about it last week. And I had some additional perspective that I just wanted to share on it, because I spend a lot of time around AI, and I also have spent a lot of time around healthcare. So for those of you who are listening to this, if you're not familiar with CRISPR or gene therapy, my goal is not to necessarily get deep into all of that, because there's the gene therapy piece and then there's the AI plus gene therapy component. But just as a high level, if you're not familiar with gene mapping and gene editing, essentially it's basically looking at the DNA sequencing of things and then figuring out how can we change the DNA sequencing to ideally improve health outcomes or cure diseases, or in some cases, commercialize and do, stuff. So anyway, I don't necessarily want to get into that because I've got mixed feelings and can probably do a 4-6 hour conversation on just my thoughts around gene therapy. But the recent development is that they've now paired some of the latest and greatest technology for DNA sequencing and gene mapping And essentially what they're able to do is map this thing out and then say, hey, what if we move these around? And as you can imagine, it is a perfect use case for AI. Genes and DNA sequences are riddled with patterns and things like that that AI can then look at and look at all the data and then say, well, like, what if we did this? And this might be a better way to solve this problem. And so part of me is really excited about this because this is going to accelerate this. And in my pharma days, we spent a lot of time talking about this because we were using it to see, could we improve the way we develop pharmaceutical products to treat things like cancer? Can we do bio-targeted cancer treatments, things like that? So there's some really, really cool stuff that we can do it. And AI has the potential to accelerate this dramatically because it can look at patterns, it can look at data far faster and far more comprehensive than people can. And then people can look at that and make decisions based on that. I have two categories of concerns or things that I think we need to be thinking about with this as we dig into it. And you'll see why I say one is my less concern, one is my more concern. So my less concerned areas is anybody who's worked much with AI knows that AI is not infallible. First of all, one, it's trained on human data. It's trained by humans. We're busted. And so inevitably, the conclusions it draws, the outcomes it produces are not going to be 100% consistent. And one of the challenges is, especially with really, really complicated things like DNA sequencing and gene mapping, is, if you ask AI something about the Revolutionary War and it gives you an answer, it's in general a little bit easier to go, wait a minute. And we saw this with Google's image creation ability, where it created pictures of the founding fathers that were not the right color. And people quickly went, whoa, this isn't right. When you start dealing with complicated things like gene mapping, it's not going to necessarily be so apparent that it's wrong. And so I think that is definitely something. The reason I say I'm less concerned about this is we don't necessarily always know when our conclusions are wrong in this space in general. And it's a highly professional field. You can't just go into gene therapy and DNA sequencing out of high school. I mean, these people are advanced degrees in medical science and all these other things. So this is a natural risk. I think what it speaks to is, do we need to make sure there's a high degree of human intervention involved? Like, absolutely. But to me, this whole like, well, what if AI is wrong? Well, guess what? When it comes to this kind of healthcare innovation, people are wrong and we're making mistakes. So yes, it's a risk. I think it's one that is naturally comes with the territory, which again, like I say so often, means let's go slow. Let's think through these things. I think another one is the nature of unintended consequences. When you're dealing with something like someone's DNA, you might tweak something thinking, hey, we're going to get this outcome. And AI might even predict the right outcome. But you make that change and we don't fully understand because maybe we've never done it before. Well, oops, I turned this on and now these 7 things turned off. Crap. Did I actually make a bigger problem than I was actually trying to solve? And the reason I say, don't take me saying I'm less concerned about this as I don't think that's a real risk or something to be concerned about. I absolutely think it's something that we need to be concerned about, especially with something as complicated as this, because you change somebody's DNA, you can't just go, oh, here, take this aspirin and you'll feel better in 2 weeks. It's like, well, we've made a permanent change. But reason I downplay the concern from an AI standpoint is that's the nature of experimentation and innovation, is you're going to do things and not understand the consequences of it until afterwards. So those two in particular, I think my concern just rests with gene therapy and DNA sequencing in general, and less with like, oh no, with AI. I think my concerns with AI really, one, as you always know, is how fast we move with it. And are we thinking through all the potential unintended consequences? I think this is definitely an area that while I'm excited where this could go, I think we need to tread very carefully and not be super quick to just jump into it and go, hey, why not? Like, let's modify this person's genetic code. What could possibly go wrong? I think the big ones, though, aside from that for me, are AI has this really, really dangerous potential to make people who are knowledgeable enough to be dangerous overconfident in their ability to do things. And so this is one that I think we need to be really, really mindful of, because I can see now with AI attaching to this, there are going to be startups, there are going to be companies that go, hey, I kind of know what this is, but hey, with the power of AI, we should be able to get this off the ground, no problem. And this is, again, not something we want to just be messing with lightly. And I've seen this, if you listen to last week's weekly update, I talked about how TCL, the TV company, came out with an AI generated movie. Perfect example of this. Hey, we're an electronics manufacturing company. No reason we can't get into the movie making business. Not really. Film is a very complicated, skilled art. You can't just go, well, AI will help. And this is one where I go, boy, there is a real risk that companies could become overconfident in their ability and they don't have the years of experience. They don't have the expertise. And they go, well, AI will close those gaps for us. And I think, if you're in the healthcare space, or, somebody could spin this up and go, hey, we're a healthcare innovation company. We've figured out how to do this stuff. There are going to be people that go, wow, awesome. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And so be careful as some of this stuff starts to come to market faster, which it will, because now the AI is involved in this. We're going to see, gene therapy solutions popping up much faster than we have historically. And as consumers, we need to be aware that, hey, what is your track record of doing this? If all of a sudden an innovation has just rapidly accelerated, is it a legitimate acceleration? Was the acceleration due to the fact that it cracked something that we hadn't recognized before? Or was it just, hey, we got AI, we can do this now? So that's a concern I have. I think another big one, though, is I am very concerned about some of the class divides that these kinds of technological innovations are going to create. And what I mean by that is, just historically in general, we have a bad tendency to, when we go into these experimentation modes, we can have a tendency to exploit the vulnerable for the experimentation phase. Well, we can fix this genetic disease. We can overcome this thing. Let's get a bunch of people who may be in a position that they don't really understand the implications of this, or maybe are really desperate because they just want something fixed. And let's recruit them in and experiment on them because, hey, they're just so desperate for it. Like, let's just go for it. And if you know healthcare, this is an area that can have some serious consequences. And this class can just be kind of seen as like, well, it's the cost of doing business. You break a few eggs to make an omelet. But then what can happen? So first of all, being really mindful that we don't let that creep into our innovation and just say, well, the ends justifies the means, because we need to be protecting people who start getting involved in this. And this goes bigger into the gene therapy stuff. But as it starts moving faster, one of the challenges for anybody not familiar with healthcare or some of these innovations in the healthcare spaces, sometimes the barrier is just finding people willing to experiment with, because you're messing with people's health. And so there is this constant pressure to go, well, what could we do? Now AI is accelerating this. There's only so much you can accelerate when you're struggling to fill a group of people to experiment with. And this risk of further exploiting, going, okay, what can we do to get people in, is real. And I think we need to be very careful. If you're in the healthcare leadership space, how do you guard against that? But if you're a consumer, that this is part of why I do this, to make people educated so they're thinking carefully about this and you aren't taken advantage of. But I think the other part is that class of people can be exploited. And then once it's cracked, then it goes to market, and to commercialize this thing, it gets priced way out of the price point of the very people that were brought in to experiment with. And so the class divide of, well, the people the haves have even more now, and the have-nots just go, well, we were the ones that helped figure out this. We can't even afford the solution that we helped create. And I think this is one of the things that we really have to watch out for as we see AI start to accelerate some of these things and push this stuff forward. And so what can we be doing to ensure equity and equality as we go into this, that we don't end up exploiting people to come up with this, to keep pace, only to then leave them in the dust when it comes to it. And so I think a lot of these things are just things. These are some of the concerns I'm having related to some of this stuff as we're seeing some of these great innovations. So that's kind of where I stand this week on some of the biggest news. Will be really interesting to watch where all this stuff goes. But hopefully this conversation has at least given you, one, made you a little more aware of what's happening and and giving you some food for thought on how to think about things and how to wrestle with some of this stuff, because there's no shortage of things to wrestle with. So like always, I appreciate you listening in. Hope you found it helpful. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and weekend or week, whatever the heck, whenever you listen to this. And I will see you on the other side.